What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. On this episode, we are going to start working on the van's electrical cabinet. The fabrication, the layout, material I used, a little bit of everything. So definitely stay tuned and let's get into it. So first thing is to get these panels cut on the CNC router. Now, I already drew these up and worked with the layout of all the material that has to go on them. So now it's just a matter of cutting them. So I run them through a simulation on Fusion 360 to make sure everything runs the way it's supposed to before I send it out to the actual router. Now, these vents you see it cutting right now align with the rear air conditioning intake vent. So I'm going to utilize that to help pull air out of the electrical cabinet to try to keep it cool. Now we're going to bring the machine to a home position and we'll start cutting. Now I have the video running at about 3x speed right now. So this machine is running about 40 inches a minute, which is pretty typical, the pretty typical single pass program that I use for 1/8 inch aluminum, and it works really well. I use an O-flute 3/16 end mill to cut these, and that's kind of my go-to size. It works really good. Now, once the router is done cutting, these are almost ready to go to welding. They just need some of the oil mist removed from them and the film removed, and they're pretty much ready to go with a quick wipe down. And that's the really nice thing about using a router to cut aluminum. So if you've been following the E350 build here on YouTube, this is essentially one of the last big steps in fabrication for it. And this is the electrical enclosure. Now, I build these all out of aluminum. I think the finished product is really nice. It's really robust. And the one really nice thing about building it out of aluminum like this is these are kind of built into modules. This is how I, envision this and design this. So maybe later down the road, if something were to happen to this van and you want to take this cabinet out and install it in another van, the way I design these, they can pretty much go into any E350 and be used. That way you can just take this whole thing out, put it in another van. But for right now, we're going to start welding on this thing. All right, so now we have the enclosure laying down on its face to do the welding. One thing I'll say about this enclosure is I want the back panel to sit flush with this tube. I don't want it to be proud of the tube. So that's the reason you see all these clamps and pieces of flat stock here. Now, when I start to weld this, I'm going to work my way from one end all the way to the next. And the reason I do that with aluminum is because if you started here and then you jump to the end, what it does is it pushes that error, or as the material starts to expand, it'll try to push it together and you'll create a bow. So when you start to do big pieces of aluminum, you basically have to kind of work with it as it wants to expand, let it expand and push the error one way. Do not try to push it together. So we're going to get to welding. Here we go. All right, for the weld process, we're going to be using my 325 EXT. I'm going to run this. I'm going to turn this up a little bit. It's normally set to this as kind of my go-to setting, but we're going to put this up to about 190. My balance, or my hertz is at 175. My balance 29, kind of typical for me, and half a second pre-flow, and we're gonna get to welding. All right, for this, I'm gonna be using some 3/32 fill rod, and we're gonna let it rip. All right, so this is the actual battery tray section for the electronics enclosure. This will hold all the battle-born batteries on the bottom, and I'll add some hold downs later on. But for now, let's go ahead and get the enclosure set on here and get it welded up. And right here, as I was editing this video, I realized I didn't have the microphone on while I was welding, so you can't hear the welder. So sorry about that, everybody. But if somebody wanted me to make the weld noise in the video for you, I probably could at this point. I listened to it enough. And just like the back panel, this panel, you do the same thing. I was getting the bottom post welded to the battery tray. And then I have to work my way down the back section of the panel to weld it to the battery tray. And to save everybody the suspense, yeah, I forgot to turn the microphone on in this specific spot as well. But pretty much the same deal. I welded the back panel to the battery tray, worked my way from one side to the next, and I do this just like I did the back of the panel. I started on the right side and I'm moving left. Now you don't want to start on the left side and move right and then get to the bottom of the panel and start on the right and move left. You kind of have to do it the same on the top and the bottom when you go to do this. Now I'm putting in the next panel that goes on the top side. Now this is also part of the bed assembly when this is all finished up, but this covers the top side of the framework, and then there's end caps that still have to be built. So now we're going to get into some of the electrical components. Now this is pretty much the bulk of it that has to fit inside that enclosure. So what we're going to do is go ahead and install it based on the CAD file and make sure everything lines out the way it should. So this is the basic structure for this electrical cabinet. It turned out great. I laid all this out in Fusion 360, and I wanted room for expansion when I was designing this. I wanted for the customer to be able to add more batteries if you wanted to. So this will hold up to 600 amp hours of battle-born batteries, and currently it's set up with 400 amp hours. Now, 400 amp hours is a pretty serious amount of power, but if in the future he decides, hey, this isn't enough, he can just add 2 more batteries and a couple of jumpers, and he's good to go. There's a couple more things still to do. I got to build the end caps for it and the door assembly for this. Also, the end cap for this side. So this is going to be kind of part 1 to this, and there will be a part 2. So definitely stay tuned for that, and thanks for watching, everybody.